Well, howdy, I'm from Texas, so you got to put up with this for a minute. How many of y'all are NFL football fans? Okay, you know the name Alex Smith? He is no longer an NFL player because he broke his leg on a football field. And unfortunately, in the trauma surgery afterwards, he got an implant infection. I'm here to talk about technology that will keep you moving. Real briefly, I'm going to talk about the second and third person here who are the inventors of the technology, and this literally came from the second person, Dave, who has constant referrals of infection problems, a variety of kinds, and after they dose antibiotics, there's not much they can do. If the antibiotics don't work, which sometimes it's 6 to 12 weeks with antibiotics, they start doing surgical procedures. And the surgical procedures escalate, and they have failure rates in the range of 35%. So 35% requires a second procedure, 35% requires a revision, and then it cascades to removal of the limb. Dave talked to Rajiv on campus, who is a member of the Association of Thermal Medicine, an interventional radiologist, physicist. They basically brainstorm a way to treat those infections in place. The problem is infections on metal implants, and the reason is the body's immune system doesn't penetrate the metal from the backside, and the biofilm on top of the infection prevents biofilm in the body's immune system. So biofilm formation hinders treatment and basically makes all the other approaches except surgical scraping, debridement happen. Now, the pain is shared by all parties. Alex Smith certainly had a lot of pain, but the infection risk, impact on the physician practice, the hospital, the impact of infection rates and a variety of things means everyone affects it. We are starting in prosthetic joint infections, largely because it's a big market. There's a lot of knees. There'll be over 1 million knees put in this year. The standard of care, which I've talked about going from antibiotics to debridement, multiple debridement surgeries, revisions, are highly invasive and expensive. And part of the complication is not all these patients are young, healthy athletes like Alex Smith. What Alex Smith went through, if you were 80 years old, possibly would have taken the limb, not just injured his athletic availability, but would have probably cascaded to amputation. So these are older, highly immunocompromised patients with immune system problems and high risk of, dying on the table, which is sad. Now, this is a big market. Prosthetic joints alone starts with 1.3 million hips this year. Knees aren't so far behind, about 650,000 knees, US alone. The infection rate, over $2.5 billion will be spent this year in the US alone on infections on these core first implants. The trauma case like Alex Smith, there's about a 30 to 35% infection rate of open wound injuries on a football field or on a motorcycle accident or something like that. So if only 20% of those cases are treated, that's another $1.5 billion. The end game is to move this up closer and closer to the point of surgery so that this infection is cured at the time and before it becomes a chronic or an acute infection. Now, the way we're treating this is with intermittent alternating magnetic fields, okay? Now, alternating magnetic fields might sound recognizable because we're talking about what an MRI does at different energy, different field shape, and different frequencies. So what we're doing is shaping and targeting the energy for therapeutic effect. We're not using it for alignment of iron atoms for imaging effect. The energy is concentrated on the implant surface through creating eddy currents. Just geek out for a second. And those eddy currents generate heat on the implant that dissipate quickly into the body of the implant, as well as dissipating a little bit into the soft tissue, but to the point where injury is minimized. We injure far less tissue than is taken out through a typical debridement surgery, DARE procedure, which involves removing, sometimes a centimeter of tissue. We have 1 patent issued, 3 more filings, and a couple more on the way. One thing we did not expect when we started doing these surgeries, doing these studies, was that we are synergistic with the antibiotics standard of care. Now, antibiotics being the standard of care, we had to show that we did not disrupt the effectiveness of antibiotics. In the process of doing that study, we totally did not expect, even at very modest temperatures, that we double the impact of antibiotics in this graph. This was repeated in vitro in mice as well as sheep studies. So the result here was consistent across the board. And this killing the bacteria to the level of detection is what this is showing. Was pretty amazing when it was repeated so many times. But again, it was unexpected synergy that it works together with it. The clinical model, if you look at this device, kind of looks like a rolling cart ultrasound machine. It's going to roll in the room, place the transducer on the knee, and maybe they sit there for 30 minutes, pulsing every couple of minutes. Flexible treatment options, the coil can be shaped to the particular implant, and a simple nerve block, and it can be run at very high energy levels, especially for chronic or acute patients with no real patient impact. The economics are quite attractive. The FDA interaction, just to be clear, we have no predicate device. This is a new innovative application of this. However, the FDA has been very responsive, understanding the unmet need that's out there, but also that there is a large body of safety knowledge because of MRI. We inherit a lot of body of knowledge, what happens with alternating magnetic fields in the body, and the fact that simulations in tissues have gotten so good. You see some images here. The goal, as you see that knee, is to get a very even, consistent heat distribution on the surface, which is pretty much where the infection could occur, or if we know we want to target a certain area, we can also shape a field to have hot spots on that thing if we want. So that's what the hemp implant is showing. There's a lot of stuff on this page. This, the typical timeline shows a lot of stuff, and this is true. What we care about right now is the red arrow. The red arrow shows we are doing our final definitive GLP study. Everything else has been highly effective for efficacy and safety. We're now doing a definitive GLP study for bone histology. Bone histology is a lot of fun, extensive process, but we're doing that in a very isolated environment on sheep studies. And we're doing the translation of the animal device to a human device. We're getting ready to go in first in human. What this doesn't show, you'll see Johnson & Johnson listed a couple times and DePuy Synthes. We have had support and validation studies from Johnson & Johnson. Johnson & Johnson was our lead investor in the Series A, and they've been a great partner to us. They provide a whole bunch of DePuy Attune knees for our validation studies of all sizes and types or whatever. So they've been a great partner for us, so I really can't say too much about them. And the goal is to be in first in human with at least a feasibility study in January, February next year. Key summary points: this is a non-invasive treatment completely outside the body. It can be done in conjunction with a surgical procedure, either pre or post surgery implantation, closed, but the feasibility study will probably be a double-blind study post-treatment, pre or post to a DARE procedure. So it's a very non-invasive, low-effort study, but we will do it initially as part of a surgical treatment, mainly because the surgical treatments have about a 33% failure rate of solving the infection, so there's a big statistical number to move there. But it's a breakthrough device, large multi-billion-dollar market. I showed you the US alone. Worldwide, it's even more exciting. We are at the late large animal study size, sheep stage, patents pending, as well as a patent issued, and positive outcomes for all. The physicians love it. The word game changer comes up more common than anything. The payers love it, and the ability for an implant vendor to potentially have a game-changing reduction in infection rate has really been attractive when I walked the floor of AAOS a couple weeks ago. So I appreciate your time listening to the Solenic story.